I want you to please join me in welcoming a poem from Taylor Lytell.
Hi, my name is Taylor. I work with Inside Out Writers. I've been a part of the organization since I was 15. I'm now 21. I don't ever think I'm going nowhere. And we're a good program. I discovered my talent for writing with Inside Out Writers. And I'm just going to share a quick piece that I was so unprepared. Writer's block is really a such thing, and I just dug in my folder and found something I wrote a while back, so I'm going to read it. It's called, If It's Too Good, It Can't Be True. I'm praying, but I don't know to what. Confusion on my face, cause in life I'm stuck. Stuck for 21 years, so I pray for luck. But the higher one I'm counting on is not doing as such. I'm passionate about my change, but deprived from the feeling. It's best to stay out of my way because my soul needs healing. Attacked or be attacked is my mentality today. I've been abused before, so that's why I think that way. I would love to love, but never loved before. It's because of all my lives open and closed doors. From day 1 to 21, I've been sad and blue because I learned long ago, if it's too good, it can't be true.
Thank you, Taylor. Our next panel is going to be focusing on the restoration and healing for victims and survivors of crime, and looking at restorative justice through that lens. We have another fantastic panel. Again, I'm going to invite you to please look in your programs to read about all the wonderful work that they do. We're going to have this panel moderated by Jamie Carroll, and we're also going to be hearing from Rhonda Foster, Akila Shirelles, and Azim Kamisa. All of these people have been heroes and inspirations for me personally and longtime friends of the Center for Restorative Justice, so please join me in welcoming them.
Where are we on time? Are we still going for 30 minutes? Or are we
Yeah, so another piece of information, Father Greg Boyle is at a funeral this morning, and it's unclear whether he's going to be able to make it on time. So we're going to go ahead and just go for an hour and a half, starting right now, so we'll finish about 1 p.m. We'll take an hour for presentations, and then about 30 minutes for questions and answers. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome everybody, and particularly my panelists. It's truly an honor to be sitting on the stage with them. And I think what is unique about this panel is that these are three examples. It's not on. There we go. So I think what's unique about these three human beings is that out of the seeds of sorrow has come an amazing transformation and a desire to act as agents of change in the world, asking each of us to create a different world and to respond a different way to crime. So our organizing question for this panel is, how can those working within the criminal justice system, attorneys, judges, advocates, and others, respond to the needs and support the healing of victim survivors of violent crime? And each of our panelists, like the panel before, will speak for 10 minutes, and then we'll have them each ask each other a question, and then we'll open it up to the audience.
Good morning. I just first want to say that I am appreciative for the opportunity to come before you today, and that you desire to hear from us. That shows that you care about this issue and are in agreement of how things need to change in the judicial system. I believe it would be safe for me to say that everyone in here has, okay, sure. Everyone in here has been victimized in some form or fashion in their life, whether it be being bullied or being batteries stolen out of your car. In some form or fashion, everyone has been victimized in their lifetime. And in experiencing that come the emotions of anger, fear, outrage, gamut of feelings. And I believe it would be safe to say that everyone in here has violated someone in some form or fashion. Maybe you were a bully yourself, or taking advantage of someone some way, just disregarding someone in some manner. And in doing that, have experienced feelings of guilt or shame, insolence, if not really caring at the time of how you violated that individual. And I say that I bring that out to say from the standpoint that it's the human condition and that we are all connected. And we're not alien to one another. And that as far as in the judicial process is concerned, those who have the roles that they do in addressing whatever crime has been committed, of keeping that in mind, of staying in touch with that they have been a victim and they have victimized in some way. As the survivor victim that comes into that court, the defendant, you're in touch with both of those individuals and your role in bringing about justice in that realm. My experience with the judicial system occurred about 13 years ago as a result of a tragedy that befell our family. This is my family, my husband, Ruit, who is here today, and our two children, Evan and Alec. Evan was 7 in this picture. This was taken in about September 97. And Alec, who's 7 months in this picture. And we were, very happy family. My husband was director of foster family agency, and we had decided that when we had children that I would be at home, so I was a stay-at-home mom, soccer mom. And on December 8th, 1997, I had taken Evan to pick up his soccer trophy and sign up for the basketball league at park that he'd been going to since he was about 4 years old. And we were going to head on to his school's fundraiser at Shakey's after that. And upon our leaving the park, some individuals had driven onto the lot, and there had been a shooting in Los Angeles about 2 hours prior between gang members, rival gangs. And the individuals who drove onto the lot were seeking to get revenge and could not find those who were responsible, who they felt were responsible for shooting, basically came to the park looking for someone to kill. They just wanted to kill someone. It just so happened that the man that was parked next to me, the color of his car was red, and that was the rival color. And so they decided that that's who they were going to kill. The man was not a gang member. He actually was there for the very same reason that we were. And they got out of the vehicle, and as I was preparing to leave, I lifted my eyes and saw these individuals standing in the parking lot. And I was like, oh my God, they're going to shoot this man. And the distance was from about where I am to the back of the room, as far as where they were standing. And I sought to escape out of the way as fast as I could. And in so doing, at the same time, they had shot off their weapon, which was a MAC-90 assault weapon. I came to understand that this can have a capacity of 500 bullets, and I was told that 75 were shot in that park, and about 11 of them hit our vehicle. Another picture of our sons. This was taken a month before that happened, Evan and Alec. Initially, I thought that I was successful because I was okay. Turned around to check on my children and found out differently. Alec had blood on his face, and Evan was slumped down in the back seat. And needless to say, I was in shock. I didn't even know the bullets were coming our way, and I was like, "Oh my God, they shot at us!" And I went to get help from the gym, and when the paramedics arrived, I asked them, how was Evan? And they told me that he was gone. And in that very instant, I just asked God told God actually that he was going to have to hold me up. And I came around and got in the vehicle with Evan, and the paramedic was in the front seat examining. And at that moment, I just began to feel this rage, and it wasn't so much just directly at who was responsible at the time, but just as far as the condition of our society as a whole, from the standpoint of young individuals having access to weapons and what has been going on in our society. And the paramedic said something to me at that point, which was, "He's in a better place, ma'am." And when he said that, my response to him was, "You got that right." And him saying that basically pulled me from the rage that I was experiencing in that moment. My husband was at church at the time, and he was leading prayer, and he got a phone call and about what had occurred, and had to come to the park, and was met with the police. We had been transported to the hospital. And the individuals that were responsible, they were caught within, two of them were caught within the week, the driver and one who had a gun that had jammed. And the shooter, he had gone into hiding. Our story hit the news, and there's a lot of coverage, and as a result of that, that's how the two were apprehended within the week. There was the press was asking for a statement from us. Oh my gosh, okay. Okay, and so I'll fast forward. I just told her how much time I have left. So the shooter was caught and 7 months later. We began our process with the court that November, and we got orange shirts with Evan's picture on it, and we were told that we couldn't have that. So that was our first experience of realizing that we didn't really have rights at that time, and that it was about what was happening for the defendants. And something else that I feel that's very important is that there's a certain reverence in the courtroom, specifically for the judge, as well as for the law and for the rights of the defendants. But for the survivor, for the victim, not so. And when we're victimized, the reason that it hits us at the very core of our being, and it's because we all are valuable, we all are precious. And when we're victimized, that's stripped from us. And coming into that courtroom, that should be in the forefront as well, as far as those that are in the role of bringing about justice in that time, from the standpoint that that is what needs to be restored for the survivor, for the victim. And we have a place in that courtroom as well. And so that is very primary for how those that are in those roles can serve us better. The only time when we had rights was when we were able to give our victim impact statement. And that was the very, first time that we felt that we did. And we came, my husband and I, from a vantage point of speaking the truth in love. From as far as myself was concerned, I shared with them about that day of Evan, that last day with him, and how excited he was about school, how excited he was. He's commented about wanting to learn everything and play every sport, and I basically pointed out to them that considering that weapon, they could have wiped out all four of us, the intended victim as well as the three of us. They were, they had ended up pleading out as well. It was 7 months of continuances, which was very disrespectful to us from the standpoint of they each had 3 lawyers, and the lawyers would come and speak right in front of us about who was going to ask for a continuance that day and why they were going to ask for that continuance. And after 7 months of that, they ended up pleading out, which I was very glad about, because for me, for us to go through a trial, I felt that jurors would be victimized as well, considering our case and how horrific it was. So I was very thankful that they ended up pleading out. And as I said, we spoke the truth in love from the standpoint of how they had impacted our lives, how they had turned our lives upside down, but holding them responsible for their actions and encouraging them to turn their lives around, and that they owed that to our son as well as to themselves. And as a result of how we came, and my husband, when he spoke, he also addressed the injustices that we felt that we had experienced through the process. And as a result of that, the shooter, the actual man who took our son's life, who had been disrespectful throughout the whole time as well, how he acted as though he was inconvenienced, he was brought to tears and expressed his shame and that he had always been a rebellious person, and even though he grew up in a Christian home, and that he deserved whatever he got. That's basically what he expressed to us. And I do want to say that we had a wonderful DA, and she was very empathetic towards us and respectful of our feelings, and that is a key thing that is also very important. Probably.
Jamie, can you reread the guiding question?
The guiding question is, how can those working within the criminal justice system respond to the needs and support the healing of victim survivors of violent crime?
So some of you know my story, that I grew up in Watts in the Jordan housing projects. I was instrumental in 1992 in organizing the peace treaty between the Crips and Bloods in our neighborhood and the 4 major housing projects that domino effect across the country and changed the quality of life in our community. it was an unbelievable opening and experience, and I truly believe it was a transformative experience, and I truly believe that the peace treaty was a restorative justice effort, even though we didn't utilize that language in organizing and in manifesting this series of events. It was that. April the 27th and 28th of this year, we're celebrating the 20th anniversary. As a result of our work 20 years ago, LA County is no longer on the coveted top 15 most violent city list. We've had 8 consecutive years in a row of decreased violence, gang violence and homicides. And I give most of that credit to those individuals who are currently still doing the work on the front line. And of course, a strategic partnership with law enforcement. I give them some credit as well. To speak to the guiding question, because I know that we have, attorneys and lawyers and future lawyers and judges and advocates and activists in this room. I want to talk about a less talked about story is what inspired my activism, what inspired me to go back in the neighborhood and begin to organize a bunch of my homies and to have a conversation about the possibility of a peace treaty. I went to Cal State Northridge in 1987 and had a transformative experience there. I shared with a woman on campus that I was dating, that I was totally crazy about, that I had been sexually abused as a kid. And this was after a series of events of not really wanting to, but it was actually the first noble act in my life. Sharing that experience created space in my heart and imagination in a way that I never had access to before. I never questioned any of the violence that I saw happen in the neighborhood because it meant to question the violence that I experienced in my own household. And I didn't have the courage nor the language to do so. But through reading books like James Baldwin, The Evidence of Things Not Seen, and his analysis of the Atlanta child murders and Wayne Williams being convicted of 2 of 28 murders, and to this day, 26 of those murders are still unsolved. Through reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, which was my history. I was born and raised in the Nation of Islam, and at the same time really didn't understand the connection, but after reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, it inspired me, it politicized me. So this combination of James Baldwin's literary genius and Malcolm X activism, it inspired me to go back to the neighborhood to want to do something about the problem that I saw happening there. But the question, the guiding question that Jamie shared, I think, is about what can activists and lawyers and advocates do to help the healing of victims. And, my belief is that experiences like the one that I went through, also, some of you know that in 2004, after 16 years of doing this work, my oldest son, Terrell, a freshman at Humboldt State University, came home on winter break and was murdered not too far from here. These type of events, they trigger our own deep wounds in our personal life. And, the thing that inspired my activism was coming to terms with my own abuse. I was stalking all of the ways in which that experience actually affected my life and trying to understand, why did no one say anything? Why did no one protect me? So I took on this whole, persona of wanting to save the world, in a sense. And this was a part of my childhood imagination as well, coming up as a kid, this idea that we could actually save the world. And so this, wound that I carried in my personal life actually informed the work that I began to do in the community. And I believe that many folks who are activists, who are judges, who are lawyers, who are service providers, that something happened in our personal life that triggered this type of knowing, this type of, desire to want to create something or create a better world and a better community and a better family. And I think that as well, similarly, we act kind of like out of the conditioning that we've been, have been guided by, like in our upbringing. So, when I talk about, my sexual abuse as a kid, I say that at one point in my life, it was my greatest shame. It was the thing that I carried the most guilt and humiliation around. But over the years, I've come to understand, and I don't condone what the perpetrator did to me, nor in the case of my son, but I do recognize now that every perpetrator is a victim. That if we continue to operate as we currently do with our current justice system, this whole eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth game that we play is going to leave us all blind and toothless. And it's like somehow we have to metamorphose to give an idea about the experiences that we've had so that they then begin to work for us. So as I said, at one time, my abuse was my biggest shame, and today, it's my greatest gift. Because I have this capacity to see deeply into things and feel deeply into things in a way that I don't know if I would have had if I didn't have that experience. And again, I'm not condoning what the perpetrator did, but I recognize that I have this access, this level of clairvoyance in a sense, that brings me closer and connects me with people as a result of the experience. Now, it was a journey. I had to learn to forgive myself. Then it brought me to a place where I was able to actually forgive the perpetrator. As an initiation to hold space for this possibility or probability of something else being able to be born from this experience. So when I think about like what is it that we can say or what is it that we can do, to support victims, I'm like we have to find a way to metamorphose the experiences that we've had in our personal life, because the experiences that we had are not who we are. Whether a perpetrator or a victim, they're not who we are. They only inform who we're actually becoming. But unfortunately, we live in a culture that defines people by the things that they do, or their profession, or how much money they have. We're none of those things. We're truly divine beings that have the capacity to determine our own fate. And I think that when we covet these secrets, these shames in our personal life, they fester. And they consume us. It's similar to like water. Water is a profound thing that gives life. But if you dam water up, water becomes toxic and it can kill you. So we have to be able to find a way to expose the deep secrets in our personal life as a way of accessing the gift of who we are. Because my belief is that in every tragedy, there's a gift. But we have to hold space sometime, and we have to sit in the anguish of the pain long enough to discover what the gift is. So, I say to all of the future lawyers and judges and, those who are advocates and activists out there that find a way to speak these deep secrets in your personal life. Tell someone what you are most ashamed of and what you feel most bad about, the things that you struggle with when you sleep at night. And take a chance of being witnessed. And what I mean by witness, someone holding space for you that doesn't define you as your experience. In this process of witnessing, a sacrament actually takes place. And this, sacrament comes from the psycho-spiritual tradition. I think it predates the Catholic Church, but it's present there, in which the parishioner goes before the priest and confesses, and the priest actually absolves them of the emotional stings that are connected with the transgression. I mean, they can never wipe away the memory. However, they help them by spirit investing in them to transform that experience so that it no longer burdens them. It no longer prevents them from moving forward and being and accessing their joy. So I think that the greatest thing that we can do, because it's about transforming a system. And what is a system? It's the collective thinking of the people. So if each individual has the capacity to change and transform or metamorphose their experience, then there's a possibility for a quantum effect. That 1 affects 2, and 2 affects 4, and 4 affects 8, 15, 100, 1,000,000, the whole country, the whole world. So this is what I believe, and I call it a reverence movement, actually. I'm like, reverence is about the quality of attention that we give to someone or something and the intention to relate meaningfully. That reverence is not so much what we see, but it's actually how we choose to see something. It's a shift in perception from seeing the glass as half empty to half full. And it's a practice. It's by no means easy, to say go and expose your deep secrets or behold or witness someone when they come to share with you their challenges and their transgressions. So, because I think that's where it begins. And as a practice, not as something that you do, because as soon as stress is simulated on the body, we kind of, go back to what we've been conditioned to do. That's why it requires that once a transformative experience occurs and you see the patterns in your life illuminated, it's important that you engage in deep practice, whether it's meditation, yoga, somatic therapy, massage, whatever it might be, working out at the gym, running every morning. It's important that you incorporate practice in your life so that you can sustain the awakened heart. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I wanted to start with a quote. I've been an avid writer since having experienced my tragedy. And I think it will relate well because I think both in Rhonda's testimony and Akila's testimony, you will see that this is a very appropriate quote. And I wrote this in my journal 6 months after I lost my son. He was a student at San Diego State University and worked as a pizza delivery man on Fridays and Saturdays. And in a gang initiation was senselessly murdered by a 14-year-old gang member while delivering pizzas. So needless to say, that was a transformative time in my life. And that happened in 1995, 17 years ago. And it changed my life. I think it was an event that made me a different person that I am today. And as a result of some of the choices I made, I believe I'm a better person because of the choices I made. I think tragedies have that. I think tragedies have that ability that Akila so well spoke about, that based on the choices that you make at those defining moments in your life, sometimes those moments are joyous, sometimes they're tragedies, and most stories here are about tragedies. But based on the choices that you make at those defining moments in your life, you literally manifest miracles. And you literally manifest transformation in you and in society. So here's the quote: "There's nothing quite so painful as a broken heart." There's nothing quite so painful as a broken heart. But a broken heart is an open heart. If one can learn to live with an open heart, gentle transformations begin to happen. And the central point of the guiding question is about healing. And I think the system does not encourage. I think what we have to do as as practitioners within the criminal justice system is to be able to take broken hearts and make them into open hearts. Because once they are open, it is easier to transmit love, to receive love, and to create that healing. And I think that both the panelists spoke very well, but you can also see that both of them were able to take those broken hearts and make them into open hearts. And there's a process. And I think the process in my story is essentially threefold. I think the first part is you have to grieve. We don't support grieving in this country. We are very averse to pain. The slightest headache and you want to get an extra strength Tylenol. Or if you're depressed, you get a prescription for Prozac. The problem with that is 5 hours later, you're going to take another Prozac. Where I don't think pain is unavoidable. Suffering is avoidable, but pain isn't. And pain's not a bad thing. There's a beautiful story in The Prophet by Khalil Gibran where he talks about this potter that's making this beautiful masterpiece out of clay, that he loves his masterpiece so much that he actually wets the clay with his tears. But then he has to take this masterpiece and put it in an 800-degree Fahrenheit oven for 18 hours so the clay can become porcelain and radiate its beauty. So pain has that ability to create transformation and create and radiate that beauty. We all have that, and I think Akila and Rhonda both spoke about that. So I think that it's important to understand. Now, in the Sufi tradition, I'm a practicing Muslim, we have a grieving period for 40 days. And you're not supposed to cook or clean cows. I mean, I had people from my mosque that came daily with breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and I had more food than I knew what to do with. But they supported me. There were prayers on the hour. And because I was guided that during the 40 days, the soul of my son was in close proximity of me and my family and his friends. And that's the time you grieve. In the Jewish tradition, they call it sitting Shiva. I believe it's 11 days. And that grieving is important. I don't think the system supports it. And we need to make sure that the victims, for their healing, whatever the number of days are, that they must be supported to grieve. But then I was also counseled that after 40 days, my son's soul moves to a different consciousness in preparation of his forward journey. That excessive grieving by friends and family after the 40 days will impede his soul's journey in the new world. Instead, I should do some good, compassionate deeds in his name, because that will provide high-octane fuel for his forward journey. Why don't they teach you this in college? Really? Why not? So I think Akila made the point that, through this transformation, eventually healing comes in doing.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And, the second piece in the journey is that it's important to understand that by staying in resentment, you have to give up the resentment, because when you are victimized, there's anger, there's resentment. You're dealing with some pretty horrific stories here. But at the end of the day, resentment, Mandela didn't write this quote, but he made it famous. He said, resentment is like drinking poison and waiting for your enemy to die. Really, why, think about it, why have this, small, meager real estate, important real estate, a psyche occupied by somebody who's harmed you? Right? So I think you have to give that resentment. And I think the way you do that, and I think, again, the panelists talked about this, is that I have also never met an offender that was not a victim. So what I saw in my tragedies, there were victims at both ends of the gun. My son was a victim of the 14-year-old gang member. The 14-year-old gang member was a victim of society. Well, that begs the question, well, who the hell is society? Well, I don't believe that society just happenstance. Every one of us who is an American, we are responsible for creating this society. And children killing children is not a mark of a civil society. But we must take that responsibility because this is our country. So I think that understanding that will create empathy. Does that make sense? I mean, obviously, it's easy to see that my son was a victim. It's harder to see the 14-year-old as a victim as well, but he is a victim. And I think that that level of empathy is very important, which I think is also missing in the system. That once you create that empathy and see that the life this 14-year-old had, I mean, if I had the kind of life he did, I probably would have done the same thing. Because some of the abuse that these kids go through as a result of their victimization tears me up. And I've heard stories that are very difficult. So we need to understand as a system. And number three, I think that at the end of the day, you have to let go and forgive. When I started the foundation, reached out to the grandfather and guardian of my son's killer, because I told him, I can't bring my son back. You can't get your kid out of prison. The one thing we can do is to stop other kids from dying or ending up in prison. Foundation is in its 17th year now. We're still together. We have programs in schools, and we're successfully keeping kids away from gang, guns, and violence. Because violence is a learned behavior. No kid was born violent. If you accept that as a truism, then non-violence can also be a learned behavior. But you have to teach it. Kids are not going to get this through osmosis. And truly, my healing has come. I've personally been in front of over 1 million kids. Another 8 million kids have seen our story through broadcast in the classroom. But I get my healing through doing this work, being in front of kids, because I know that I can shift them through my story, through my journey. And forgiveness, and I think Akila spoke about this too, it's not condoning what Tony did. He has his own journey. And he's serving a far long. He was the first 14-year-old to be tried as an adult, and I wasn't in support of that. I'm trying to get him out earlier, but it's complicated. He's 31 years old now. And he's still, and I would say there's no escaping wrongdoing. Even if Tony was not caught, karma will take care of that. So Tony has his own journey. He still has to live for the rest of his life with the conscience that he killed an innocent, unarmed human being. That's hard. It's about me. And I think forgiveness is not very well understood. I have a choice. I had a very full life when my son was alive. I worked as an international investment banker, traveled the world, good social life, made good money. I speak a half a dozen languages, and I had no life. And I recognized that unless I forgive, I would remain a victim. And there's no quality of life being a victim. And when you forgive, you stop being a victim. I have a very full life now. I actually like this life better because investment banking was about making money. This is about saving lives of kids. I know that Akila is also very involved with that. And it's far more meaningful, far more purposeful, and that in every tragedy there is a silver lining. And maybe the gift that came out of this tragedy for me is my son put me on my path. We all have a spiritual path. And I believe it is in service. There's a quote from Albert Schweitzer, and I'll end with that. And he says that, I don't know what your destiny will be, but the one thing I can tell you is that those of you who will find happiness will find it in service. So this is the process I think the system has to go through, has to support the grieving process, to help victims give up resentment through empathy, and eventually have the victims understand that the only way to stop being a victim is to forgive. Thank you very much.
So among our panelists, do you have questions for one another?
Azim, I wanted to ask, because I was aware of the fact that you reached out to the perpetrator's father or grandfather?
Grandfather.
Grandfather, yes.
Grandfather and guardian.
Yes, I wanted to ask if you would share about how that came about and what has come out of that.
Well, 9 months after Tariq passed away, Rhonda, I had learned a lot of challenges about youth gangs because I lived in a different world. And I didn't quite, and I didn't really realize there were youth gangs at that time. I didn't grow up in this, in this climate, but I was appalled to see how big the problem was. I mean, they join gangs for the wrong reasons, sometimes for protection. They live in areas where they're targeted by a rival gang. And what's really shocked me, over the 17 years, I've met many gang members. I've actually met gang members that come from 4 to 5 generations of gang members. So essentially, they're born in this tradition. I had no choice. So I didn't personally feel there was enough being done to help these kids choose a different life. And I started the Tariq Khamisa Foundation. Our mission statement is to stop kids from killing kids by breaking the cycle of youth violence, and we essentially have 3 mandates. Our first and foremost is to save lives of children. Our second is to empower the right choices so they don't end up in gang, guns, violence, drugs, and alcohol. And number 3, to teach the principles of nonviolence. And I think that by the time our kids get to grade 1, they've seen 100,000 images of violence, right? Television, movies, video games. I mean, we are by far the most violent first world nation in the world. And that's not good, because we have a tremendous impact on the global culture, and we are exporting our violence. Maybe one way to abate violence in the world is to do it on our own streets here. So, and I recognized that for me to be able to teach these principles, as Akila said, an eye for an eye, and soon the whole world is blind, is a famous quote by Gandhi. And I recognized that you could take the position, he killed my one and only son, he should be hung from the highest pole. How does that improve society? So when I reached out to the grandfather, I asked the district attorney, and I told him that I've started this foundation with a very lofty mission statement, and I'm not here in the spirit of retribution or revenge or anger. On the contrary, I'm here in the spirit of compassion and forgiveness, because what I really see here is we both lost a child. Tony lived with him and calls him daddy. He got Ples is the grandfather. We got Tony when he was 8 years old. So I told him that, I lost my son, he died, and you lost your grandson to the adult prison system. Nothing I can do to bring my son back. Wish there was, but there's nothing I can do, he's gone. And quite frankly, there's nothing you can do to get your son out of prison, because it's not in your hands anymore, it's in the hands of the punitive criminal justice system. But the one thing you and I can do is to make sure other kids in our community do not end up dead or end up in prison. That we can do. And that's the purpose of this foundation, so I've really come to ask you for your help. I had no idea that he would accept my hand of forgiveness, because I had no idea. And the first thing that came out of his mouth, he says, ever since I found out that my grandson murdered your son, I went into the prayer closet. He's a very spiritual man. And I've been praying that someday I get a chance to meet you, because I wanted to extend my condolences to you and your family. So that's the first thing he did. And the second thing he said, and of course I will help you. 17 years have gone by, and he's as close to me as my own brother. And I would never have met him. Had Tony not taken Tariq's life, I would never have met him. I've met his entire family. He's met my entire family. I've also met Tony. I went to meet him in prison when he was 19 years old. Forgiven him, which was very transformative. He's aced his GED in prison. He's 2/3 of his way done with his first degree in child psychology. And I'm trying to get him out early, because I told him, not only I've forgiven you, I want you to know when you come out, you have a job at the foundation. Now think about the power of that when he's on stage. I know we've saved him, but think about how many he will save when he shares his testimony. Couldn't do it under the Schwarzenegger regime, but as we affectionately called him, the governator, But I'm more hopeful under the Brown administration, because Edmund Brown, who was also governor of California years ago, wrote a book on clemency. So I think there may be more heart here than maybe in the previous administration, but we're working on it. He's studying 5 books a month. He's changed who he was, and he will be a lot more used to society working for us. And I think, again, Akila said this, that in every crime, there's an opportunity to better society. And that might be a good axiom for the criminal justice system to look at. And I'm very excited that Scott and Seth and Loyola have created the Center for Restorative Justice, because my story is all about restorative justice, because the purpose of restorative justice is not, the state of California against Tony Hicks. I mean, what has the state of California got to do with it? Think about it. A crime happens in the context of community. So the parties are victim, offender, and community, not the state of California. So RJ, what they try and do is to make the victim whole. Hard to do because you can't bring Tariq back, but working with Plez and eventually working with Tony brings meaning to my life. Less kids are dying or ending up in prison. Number 2 is we must take the offender and bring him into society as a functioning, contributing member. Well, we've done that with Tony. He was 26 years old. I was able to get a camera crew in there that we interviewed him for 2.5 hours, and we used that tape for programs, because we have footage of him at 14 when he was gangbanging, and at 26 it comes across as a monk. And you see the transformation in him. You talked about the transformation. And number 3, the community must be healed. And by us doing programs in schools, we are also healing the community. So it's a much more holistic approach to making a better society as a result of crime. And I think the concept that restorative justice brings, and I'm very excited that this is only second center, I think, right, Scott, in the country? There's only other one in Marquette, and this is the second one. So I really want to acknowledge Loyola for being bold to create this.
I have a question for Rhonda, a 2-part question. I know that, as a result of this tragedy, both you and your husband, Brewitt, have been doing, amazing work before this, the tragedy and even after. And I know that you work with Community Build and do, gang intervention work. How do you see the gang intervention prevention movement contributing to the healing in the community? And then also, what do you do yourself to maintain your own balance?
Okay. As far as the gang prevention intervention in the community, it's about what has been said here already from the standpoint of recognizing that a lot of these young people have hurts themselves. There's a lot of struggle in their families, and what they want is someone to care, and that's what we're there for. That's I'm actually working in the prevention side, and we have a youth center that's located in the mall at Baldwin Hills, which has been a great location. And we welcome those families in and inform the youth that we're there for their youth, their development. We're there to support them in any way that they need it, as well as their parents, and expose them to positive activities of their interest, from sports to arts to I think of one young man that was involved in. He was a gang member. He was in tagging, and he was a great artist. And we had the opportunity to introduce him to an artist in Leimert Park who has a place called Chaos, and he worked with him one-on-one, and he got these opportunities to do a mural on a businessman's wall in the city. And, as a result of these experiences, he was transformed. He stopped the tagging. He was no longer part of his gang. And that's the kind of thing that it's about. And so as far as the program is concerned, it's a very key role, and it starts with caring, with being there, and they take it from there, you know. As far as your second question in regards to balance, my strength, my comes from my relationship with my Lord Jesus Christ, and because of Him, I'm here today. I mean, I know that considering the fact that I was there when my son's life was taken, and what was done to his physical body, for my seeing that, I know without Him, I believe I wouldn't even be in my right mind. And through Him, not only was I kept, but I could forgive. I had wanted to share what we had shared with, because there was a press. They were asking for a statement from us, after this happened. Like I said, there was a lot of media coverage, and I just want to share with you our response. And this was 2 days after it occurred, and we said, Evan Lee Foster is an awesome boy. We are so glad and thankful that he did not see the guns. He was talking to his mom in a happy mood, and in mid-sentence was escorted by the angels to Jesus. Evan loved everything that is beautiful and lovely about the world, and whatever he was doing, he wanted to share the experience with as many friends and loved ones as were available to do so. He has been a people person since birth. We know that now that he is in heaven, he wants everyone that God has created to join him. We know that he is so excited to see and be in eternity. Mrs. Collins, his second grade teacher, gave him an assignment, what I would do if I were president, and his very second statement was, I would talk to people that cause harm to others and tell them to go to church. We say to those gunmen, that is Evan's statement to you this day. We don't know what war you think you're fighting, but you're in the wrong war. Evan loves you because Jesus loves you and died for all your sins. Fall on your knees and repent. There is righteousness, peace, joy, and love on the other side for you. Thank you, everyone, for all that you're doing on behalf of our family. And we say, keep doing what you're doing, but let it be motivated by love. And to the community, we say we must stop being afraid of the, quote, gangbangers, hating them and calling them names, thugs, etc. They need love, God's love. They are our children, too. They have great potential because they are made in God's image. We must embrace all of our children, the, quote, good and the, quote, bad, and show them the way to do and be their best. The best we all can be is like Jesus. That was our response. And although, of course, the depths of pain, the heartbreak, as Azim was sharing, was there, but we didn't want retaliation. We didn't want more violence coming out of it. So that's where we came from. And as we go to the youth prisons and speak to the youth, inspired by Evan's words, and touch these lives, it's just so heartwarming, so powerful, and that's what balances me when I have that opportunity to continue to do that and working with the young people that I do at Community Build.
So I want to ask my brother Akila a question. In my journey, and I kind of heard that through your testimony, that, and also what Rhonda just shared, that in life you get problem that this is not going to solve. I don't care how many PhDs you have, right? In life, you're going to get problems. This is not going to heal. But by the same token, there are no problems that you're going to get in your life that the Spirit, Jesus Christ, cannot solve or heal. So my question to you is, if there was a time when you finally exposed your sexual abuse, probably many years later. What prompted that? And then that was a transformative point in your life. And if you could comment on not so much that your journey in terms of your intellect or emotion, but in terms of your spiritual foundation.
Yes, as I said that when I went to Cal State Northridge, I was actually escaping the war in the neighborhood. I was fortunate that, being the youngest of 10 kids in my family, being inspired by my sister, who was the first person in our family to go and graduate actually from a four-year university. I was, it was, LA was a war zone then. 1987, 88, we was experiencing 1,000, 1,100 murders a year. And every time I called home, somebody was getting shot, somebody was getting killed. And, I didn't know how to really, deal with it. So, here I am hiding out on campus. And as I said, I met this woman. And, for the men in the room, it always seems to be a woman that actually transforms your life, And this woman, she was everything that I wasn't. I mean, just beautiful. She was a year ahead of me, came from a family, two-parent household. She had a brand new car. And man, I met her at a party, and I just seen her from across the room, and, and she saw me, and I'm looking around like, she looking at me? Because, I think it's also important to understand that, like growing up in the projects and being the trampy kids that people talked about and stuff, my self-esteem was shot. So my image of myself was that I was ugly. So, I was like, I couldn't believe that this beautiful girl that I saw across the room liked this ugly dude like me. And I was so insecure about the relationship, that, I would do a bunch of silly stuff, man. I would sometimes leave class early to go listen to her door and stuff, because I knew she was cheating, I'd read her diary, violating her privacy and all types of crazy stuff. Mm-hmm. And in my machismo, and I say all of these things are important because they contributed to my spiritual awakening. In my machismo, I started messing around with some other girl on campus because I was like, I'm gonna pop my collar and cushion the fall, When I find out that she's cheating, I'm already have one. And, I ended up getting burnt, So I contracted an STD and I gave it to my girl. So that was the thing actually that I had to expose, when I sat down with her. But initially when she confronted me about it, of course I lied and tried to convince her that it was her. And there was two other incidents. I had kids at a young age, and I now understand that this over-promiscuity grew out of my abuse. I had a kid when I was 15, I had another when I was 16, I had another when I was 16, I had another when I was 17. So here I was in college, 18 years old, and my daughter's mother's parents came up to the school looking for me and, told me it was important. I'm thinking something wrong with my daughter. I called to the house and find out that Alicia's pregnant again, which is going to be my fourth child. And, I guess the thing that kind of overflowed the cup was that, I was always a good student in high school. I have this partial photostatic memory. I can see things and regurgitate things. But when I got to college, I had to study, and I didn't know how. I had to manage my finances, and I didn't know anything about finance. So after the first semester, I found myself getting ready to be kicked out of dorms and also on academic probation. And, so I had all of these things mounting against me, and I was like, this is about to take me under. So, I did what I usually do. I went and got me a fat joint and the bottom of Seagram's gin and the Old Jag bottle, and I got drunk and high. And as I laid in my bed, I started reflecting, and it brought me back to my childhood because, as I said, we didn't have a lot of things as kids, but we did have a big imagination. So the youngest 5 of my brothers and sisters, we used to get in a room together, and we used to talk about this thing we call the story. And the story was about how we was walking down the street, we fell in this hole, we met this Chinese master who blessed us with all these special powers and gifts, and we used these powers to change the world. And my sister Londi, she told the best stories. She would assign all of us like powers, and we would all take turns embellishing upon the powers that we had. And I mean, the story would go on for 4 and 5 hours long, and you know, the story became my mantra. So I believed that I would grow up and do something great because of the story. So as I began to reflect, as I'm laying in the bed, I'm like, you know, God, I'm supposed to grow up and do something great. The story, and, you know, I'm like, what I'm supposed to do? And that was my inspiration, you know, to the next morning, waking up and calling her up and deciding to do the first noble thing in my life, which was to tell her the truth. And that began my journey. That transformative experience sent me back to, like, I was like, I've been absent in my own life. I've been disconnected from myself. So I began to try to seek and find out, like, you know, where is this connection? And so I first went back to my family's tradition, which was Islam. You know, and I became a devout fundamentalist, you know, Shiite Muslim, because my mother was Shiite at the time. So I'm praying 5 times a day. I stopped drinking, stopped smoking, stopped having sex. I stopped doing everything. And the discipline that I gained through that experience carried me. And I say somewhere along the way, I began to explore, like, you know, other things. I got heavy into Egyptology. I got heavy into esoterics. And I started, you know, studying that finding out that there is the same theme, that it runs through all of the spiritual traditions. And I began to plug into that. And this is the thing that has sustained me. It's like I have, you know, really good friends, you know, some of them in this room, you know, Miguel, you know, Scott, Seth. I mean, these folks were there, you know, my mentor and good friend, Orland Bishop, these individuals was there. So when my son was murdered, I had these individuals to call on. I mean, the day after, you know, going to the sweat, you know, up in Malibu with Miguel, I mean, it was a transformative experience for me. I mean, it helped me to stay grounded. And also it gave me an opportunity to see, you know, this experience through a different door. You know, so the question that rose in my imagination when I got the call that my son was shot was, what's the gift in this tragedy? And that was the guiding question. As I'm driving to the hospital, as I go in and listen to the doctor say, you know, 10 minutes of what they did, pumping him and all kinds of stuff, and then to tell me that he didn't make it. And then, you know, calling Orland, who was at my house by then, you know, with my daughters, you know, telling him the information and stuff, you know, and telling him to, like, hold space for me because, you know, I'm no novice to death. You know, I've lost many friends and family members to violence, but nothing ever prepares you for the loss of your child. So, you know, it's, and, you know, the sustaining, like, practice for me is that, you know, as I said, I borrow from many different traditions. I have a sitting practice. I'm up every morning at 5:13. That's my internal alarm clock. And I sit, you know, 30, 45 minutes just watching my own thoughts, witnessing my thoughts pass by. And I bring that practice into my awake life as well. Because as you can imagine, in the capacities that we serve, I mean, you get everything, especially in the hood, man. You get all kinds of jealousy, envy. People project a lot of things on you. And you have to understand the spiritual process of discernment. So when someone's, you know, shouting at you and hollering on you, you got to be able to discern, like, is this about me or about them? If it's about me, I'm like, I got to take it, you know, and I have to, you know, talk, you know, hold it so that I can then metamorphose it and talk about how can I make this situation right. If it's about them, you know, I then do the same process. I open myself up because I know that being heard actually transforms a person. It's not so much what we say sometimes. So, you know, I have to open myself up and allow that person to speak everything and so that they can release it. And then I can be informed. So, you know, so these are some of the things that I do consistently to maintain my own balance, you know, and my own mental health, because I think that it's you know, it's absolutely necessary if we're going to transcend, you know, the many struggles, you know, that's going to face us in our lifetime. I think that Azim said it best, that you said something like that, like about pain. You know, we can't avoid pain, you know, but we can, you know, avoid like struggle. I mean, we don't have to struggle, or suffering. We don't have to suffer unnecessarily, you know, but pain is truly a part of our, you know, it's a part of the human experience, and it's an opportunity, you know, that can transform us, and it's a gift to be able to give. So
It's the way the universe molds us.
absolutely. Thank you.
So I'd like to take some questions from the audience now. Sujatha. Where is that mic?
My question is for Akila. Thank you so much for all of you for sharing your stories. I am particularly moved by people who have the capacity to stand up in front of groups of people and say that they were sexually abused. I myself do that quite a bit. I was sexually abused as a child by my father. And I wanted to get your insights on working within your community to help people. So I go inside Prison. I've gone into Jamie's program and I've told my story, and I can't tell you how many guys come up to me afterwards and whisper, you know, you're the first person I'm telling this. It's African-American men saying, I was sexually abused. I killed the guy who smelled like my cousin when he came up on me. And people are triggered by their histories of abuse, and they react, I think, less so in continued pedophilia and more so in violence. And, you know, I don't see very many brothers standing up in the community, and I understand that. There's, like, no one in the South Asian community standing up and saying, and you could probably attest to this too, you know, it's a very hard thing to do within our communities to stand up. There's a shame factor.
Yes.
And so I wanted your insights about how to help, other than just continuing to stand up, and I'm trying to collect a group of South Asian folks who will stand up and say, this is happening in our community. I see it as a wonderful opportunity within my community in particular that isn't addressing it, to introduce restorative justice at the onset about how we can start to heal this in our community. But I just wanted some insights on your part about how do you do this within your community, particularly how do you help people who look like you, who carry the shame, the particularized shame that exists within different communities around standing up.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you know, and I think that you answered the question as well. I think, you know, speaking one's deep secrets gives others permission to do the same. So it's about giving permission, you know. So the telling of my story, and I try to do it as often as I possibly can, especially in the neighborhood. It's like, it's you know, when I tell the story, it silences the whole room, and you see people stop moving, because the truth of the matter is that sexual abuse is a tool of colonization, you know. 85% of the people in this country, in this room, has all experienced the exact same thing, you know. It was a way of shaming people into silence. So I think that it's important how it's framed, because a lot of times we think that we're the only one, you know, that this has happened to. So, you know, this idea that I talk about of a reverence movement, about making the taboos a commonplace, you know, I think that also, you know, it's important that we need to create some form of a, like, and I call it a Truth and Restorative Justice Commission, similar to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. We need to create an intentional space so that people can come forward and expose the deep secrets and be witnessed and have sacrament performed, you know, on them, and be given amnesty, you know, from the things that they've perpetrated. Because I tell you, the perpetrator, I love the perpetrator, you know, it's one of my family members. And I mean, I don't condone what he's done, you know, but at the same time, I recognize, like, when I, you know, finally got the opportunity to bring it to him, and I love to tell that story too, but when I got an opportunity to bring it to him, he, you know, he was so shocked that I even languaged it and told him, hey, I forgive you. He was like, and it made me flash back on my own experience, because when the words came out of my mouth, I mean, my heart was like, I was like, and while she was on the other side of the table asking me who, when, why, where, I was like, I can't believe, because I can vividly remember, you know, third grade promising myself that I would never share those words because of the stigmas that are associated with it. Mm-hmm. You know, so I think that you know, the question that I asked him was, where did it happen for you? And you know, he couldn't answer. He was still like, huh? You know, and I'm like, to each person in their own time, you know. So he has to find his voice. And I'm like, and I can be, you know, a marker, a benchmark for him, you know, that, you know, this is a conversation that we can engage. And I mean, and his life is tragic in itself. I mean, you know, because as, you know, Azim said that our lives are intrinsically connected to, you know, those that we have victimized or been or we've perpetrated something against, you know, and our healing hinges upon us being able to reconcile, you know, that disconnect, so that we could live some sort of a, you know, balanced life in this world.
Name, brother, but I do know your spirit, your identity, and your cause. I think we were introduced before by Sheikh Mujahid Abdul Kareem.
Yes, sir. Yes,
and
sir.
Watson. What you did speak on that is so important is the anniversary of the 20th of the peace treaties.
Yes, sir.
I too was a part of that experience. Like you said, formative experience for me also. And I wanted to comment on what you think we can do as individuals to capitalize on what we lost. We had a beautiful opportunity during that time, and we were, the shenanigans came out to play, and there were things in our way that we didn't know that we know now. And I'm still a member of the community in Watts, Long Beach, Compton, wherever it's at, that's where I'm at. So I'm glad we were able to meet again, and I'm sure we'll work together, but I want to get you to comment on what is the agenda for that.
The theme of the 20th anniversary is going to happen April 27th and 28th there's a panel discussion that's going to happen on the 27th, and then a unity music celebration that's going to happen on the 28th. And you can go to our Facebook page and look at 20th anniversary reunion celebration and get like more details. But the theme of it is what's possible, healing as a catalyst for sustainable change. The interesting thing is that, like, you know, just like you're saying, brother, like all of the folks, you know, who were instrumental and a part of the movement, you know, back then, I had been running into folks, and, you know, and every person was saying, man, we did something great. And they said, you know, at the same time but I was so messed up that I couldn't get out of my own way, you know, to see the benefit of what we created. And it was like, but I've now took out some time to heal, and they're like, and I'm ready. You know, so I think that, you know, that's the conversation. That now that we've healed, you know, we need to bring that practice, you know, to the next generation. That somehow we have to support, you know, these young folks and ourselves in finding alternative healing strategies, not just, you know, the mental health approach. I'm grateful for the woman who talked about the public health model, you know, that we have to engage a public health approach that tells us that we can actually heal ourselves. Because historically, it's not just, you know, black men and black folks are afraid of hospitals and we don't go to get served. Historically, you know, Dr. Harriet Washington wrote a book on it. From 1600s to the present, we've been experimented on. You know, so we're afraid of Augustus Hawkins and you know, Martin Luther King and all of these particular places because they've experimented on us. So we have to destigmatize, you know, healing, and, you know, metamorphose it and make it our own. You know, and I think that there are a lot of alternative healing, you know, technologies out there that we can access that sometimes we just don't give ourselves permission to use. You know, because especially in the black community, we'd be like, oh, that's white people. You know, yoga is for white people. Massage, if it ain't got no happy ending, it's for white people. You know? And I'm like, you know, we got to do these things for ourselves, because massage therapy moves the etheric energy in the body. You know, it's a therapy. So we have to do some of these things to begin to heal from the traumatic experiences in our life.
Hi, my name is Irma. Thank you for being here. Your stories are very, very powerful, so thank you for sharing. My question is for Asim. You mentioned that Tony, who was the person who killed your son, is doing well, and even better than well, in the system where he's thriving, getting his GED, furthering his education. So how did that happen? Because I walk with families who their kids can't even get access to a dentist or something like that. So my question to you, is it because you are advocating for him because of your own healing, or is it because your forgiveness of him allowed him to begin his own healing and therefore he can advocate for himself? Like, I'm trying to piece the whole restorative justice piece that has happened and has helped him get to that rehabilitative state that the system doesn't have because of that silent R that the warden just talked about earlier. So I just want to hear a little bit about that.
Yes, great question. When I met him, he was 19 years old. So it was 5 years after the tragedy. I'd obviously met the grandfather 9 months after the tragedy because I started the foundation, which is named after my son, the Tariq Khamisa Foundation. But I understood at some point, for me to complete my journey of forgiveness, I had to come eyeball to eyeball with Tony, because he was the one that pulled the trigger on my son. And 4.5 years later, I was ready, so I asked Ples, because I knew the grandfather well by then, that I want to go see Tony, and he wasn't ready for me because he had no idea that I wanted to meet him. But then 6 months later, he was ready, so I met him. And Ples was there, but I told Ples, I said, I need some alone time with Tony because he was the last person to see my son. And there were some holes in the, in the story that I wanted to complete. So Ples, we started 3 of us together, then Ples left us for a good hour and a half where he and I talked man to man. And he was sitting very close. I was as close to him as I am to Akila. And in this hour and a half, at one point, we locked eyes for a very long time. I'm looking into his eyes, and he's looking into my eyes. And I'm looking in his eyes, looking for a murderer, and I didn't see one. That I was able to climb through his eyes and touch his humanity. That I got that the spark in him was no different than the spark in me, or the spark in you, or everybody in this room. Sure, he'd murdered my one and only son, but that did not make him inhuman. So at that point, I told him that not only have I forgiven you, I want you to know that when you come out, you come and work with your grandfather and me at the Tariq Khamisa Foundation. And that was very transformative for him because prior to me meeting him, he would tell his grandfather, I'm not going to make it in prison. I'm going to die in prison. He's a young, charismatic, good-looking man in an adult prison. And you know what our prisons are like. And after I left, because when there's in my 3rd book, there's a chapter that was inspired by my meeting with Tony. And the title of the chapter is Realize with Real Eyes. And that came in because sometimes these eyes have too much judgment. Maybe you need to look at it deeper from your soul. But when I left him, the grandfather was still there. And then Ples called me, Ples is the grandfather, called me the next day. And he said, after you left, Tony and I visited some more. And he says, you have totally transformed him. Because what he said to me is, as you were leaving, he said, Daddy, that's a very special man. I killed his one and only son. And not only has he forgiven me, he's also offered me a job. I'm not worthy of that, but I'm going to be worthy of that. And he has become worthy of it because he's already helping us out.
One last question.
Testimonies of the three of you all, because such as I lost two of my sons, not at the same time, different times, maybe 4 years apart. One of my sons was 18, and the other one was in his middle 20s due to street violence. And I'm sorry, my restoration and healing process started from giving back, talking to families of tragedies such as that I've gone through, and to never give up on that. And so basically what I'm saying is now I know that I'm healing. I don't think parents, as that we've gone through, will ever be healed. We're yet healing and recovering. But now I'm so thankful to God for blessing me. Now I can put pictures up. I can lay out clothing and talk about more freely of tragedies that I've gone through to help other families, to start their healing process, because like I said, you never get over it, no, but you can always give back. And it was a quote that you had said earlier, I wrote it down, and I will keep that as far as my daily growth, because truly it is a process, and it needs to be talked about more, because I know I felt like I was the only one that was going through, and I'm sure you did too. I'm the only one going through this. No one will understand what are the reasons behind this. But because of restoration and healing and my faith, I can stand here today and share.
Cool. Thank you.
One last question here.
Yes, Geraldine Stapleton with the Peace Alliance and the Violence Prevention Coalition. I have a question for Rhonda. Could you elaborate a little bit more on what your foundation does?
Yes. We primarily have been going into the youth prisons, number of them that are now closed, since 1999. And starting then, there's a class called the Impact of Crime on Victims class. And we would go into this class and share our story, and also seek to empower the young people, share with them our love and our belief in them, and that they are needed in our society, and they hold answers for what our society suffers from. And so primarily that, we went into Nellis, Starks, one in Ventura, and also we have held youth empowerment events in the city, having youth from all over ethnicities, backgrounds, to come together and share their gifts, their talents, their how they want their society to be. And we also worked with Culver City Police Department. They have a juvenile diversion program. And where young people that have been arrested for the first time have the opportunity to go through this program and have that basically exonerated from that. And so the same thing that we're doing in the prisons, working with them with that. And ultimately what we want to do is to have a program for the young people coming out of prison and helping them to find their place in society and contribute.
So in closing, I'd just like to say that as you hold the stories of the panelists today, I also invite you to think about how your own stories might be used to open up the system and hold the hearts of those that have been injured by crime.